Okay, let's continue. So we've just discussed the enterprise, the entrepreneurs, and the business plan. Now, how actually the sizes of enterprises can be measured? So there are different ways of measuring and saying how big the company is, but one way is to look at the number of employees. So the larger the number of employees, obviously the size of enterprise tends to be larger. Another way is to look at the value of output. So if you're a producer, so if you're in a, for example, primary sector or secondary sector business, then obviously your size can also be measured with the output that your company is producing, number of units that you're producing, number of tons of oil produced per day. If you're a service company, then you actually may say, we have this amount of users, we have this amount of customers. Value of sales in tenge, in money, in dollars, also is a measure of the size of the company. So, for example, if you hear the thing such as this is this company generates, let's say, 1 billion tenge per year, then that's an average company in Kazakhstan. Value of capital employed, so how much, sometimes, especially in the startups that are not yet generating revenues, such as Airbnb, for example, it used to be like that. Uber company, it used to be like that. They didn't generate a lot of money. However, there was a lot of interest in this company, and lots of investors were actually keen on investing their money. And value of capital invested. Why businesses strive to grow? Why they're trying to grow? I think it's kind of obvious, isn't it? So businesses they try to generate more profit, more status and prestige. Okay, you're becoming, if you're a very large business, then the founders, the CEO, the other employees, the management team, they also become quite famous. Lower average costs. Now we're gonna now introduce the basic concept of economies of scale. Economies of scale is a fact of saving the money, of reducing the costs. If you do remember, one way to increase the profit is to reduce the costs. Now, if you're a large company, and let's say that you're buying in bulk optom, then your suppliers, they will tend to give you some discount for these large bulk amounts. So for example, if you're buying let's say one sanitizer, then the price would be, say, 500 tenge. If you're for example buying 10,000 units of sanitizers, then obviously the price per unit is going to be different, say 300 tenge. So larger companies, they consume and buy a lot of supplies, the materials, and therefore they used to save a lot of money per unit. Larger market share. Now, if you are a big company, it's difficult to beat you. If you're a small company, it's relatively easy to beat you. To let's say to buy you. Okay, we're gonna talk about this acquisitions and mergers in a few minutes. But if you're a very small company, then you are at risk of being beaten by larger companies, because larger companies can always benefit the economies of scale. They can actually do dumping, so they can actually claim the price war, and for the same product they can actually say, well, we're gonna sell identical product at a much lower price, so that you can't actually sustain this price war, this competition, and therefore you'll have to go bankrupt, or you'll have to say yes if the larger company wants to buy you. And that's what is actually happening worldwide. Now, how can businesses grow? There are two broad ways of growing. The first one is organic growth, the internal growth, when the firm gradually expands and it increases its capacity, it hires more people, develop more internal talent, seek for other investments, and they gradually grow internally. However, external growth means that you do not grow gradually but rapidly. One example can be acquisition. when you buy another company. Okay, we're going to talk about these acquisitions now, or merger, when two companies they merge and suddenly in one day double their size or triple their size. So that's inorganic growth. That's external growth. Now let's define two ways of integration. There is a vertical integration, a horizontal integration. Now, why do we need to know that, and what's the difference? If you do remember, there were different primary, secondary, and tertiary sector businesses. Do you remember that? So if a company, say in a primary sector business, buys out and acquires a company that is actually manufacturing and using its raw materials to further refine it, then that's going to be an example of vertical integration and so on. But if a company buys another raw material extracting company, that's going to be an example of horizontal integration. So when two companies are in a different sectors, primary, secondary, for example, this is an example of vertical. If they're in the same sector, then that's going to be an example of horizontal. Why companies buy out another companies? Well, sometimes it's the only way to grow rapidly. Sometimes it's the only and feasible way of growth, because it may take years to actually grow substantially, and you will have to face lots of risks. You never know whether you're going to be able to achieve this particular result in 5 or 10 years time. So that's why the biggest advantage of acquisition is it happens suddenly. There is a certain not guarantee, but there is certainty that this is the size, this is the company, these are the competencies of the company. However, what's the biggest disadvantage? It's the cost. So we're gonna look at Kazakh Telecom and Kcell example in our seminar Zoom activity. Discuss this particular scenario, discuss this particular takeover. So keep an eye on that, please. Now, as I said before, the difference between horizontal and vertical is a matter of sectors. Now, what is the business objective, and who are the stakeholders? Why do we need a business objective? Objective is needed to say, everyone, here is our target. If you have a very large company, imagine that you have very, very many units, not only in Kazakhstan or not only in Astana, but worldwide. How do you communicate? How do you actually unite everyone and trying to grow? Well, without a certain business objective, you can't do that. So one of the main reasons why business objectives are set to give all employees and managers a very clear target. Prioritize the decisions, because in quite many cases, almost always in business, there isn't one obvious, the best answer. There are always some trade-offs. On one hand, this is good. On the other hand, this is not so good. So it's always about making a decision. It's always about choosing and prioritizing. There are always some trade-offs. So having a business objective actually guides you to make and prioritize the decision making. Measure the performance is another idea of having a business objective, because you're going to say, okay, by the end of the year, if your business objective for this particular 2020 year is to achieve, for example, this amount of production or this amount of revenue, then you're going to say, okay, hold on a sec. In this quarter, in this month, are we actually keeping what we're actually trying to achieve? So this is another measure of performance. Now, typically, businesses can set the following objectives. It's increasing the market share. Now, let's talk about market share. Now, let's say that there are lots of producers of sanitizers in Kazakhstan. In fact, there are more than 100 of them, okay? And let's say that the market is generating, for example, per year, I don't know, 5 billion tenge worth of sanitizers in Kazakhstan. How about your company? If your company is generating, say, 1 billion, which is a very large company in this particular case, that means that your market share is going to be 1 billion divided by 5 billion. And therefore, you're actually controlling and owning 20% of the market. So that's the market share. It's always a percentage. Also, businesses, they want to try to achieve profit maximization, which is revenue minus costs, minus business size growth. So sometimes businesses can say, we're not too worried about profit this year, but we're very worried about growing. So even sometimes they will say tolerate a very small profit margin, but they're going to say, well, no, we're going to tolerate a small profit margin. However, we're going to increase. So they're going to aggressively invest in marketing. They're going to aggressively expand so that they actually can achieve a larger market share. Return to shareholders is about maximization of profit to the final shareholders. Service to community. Sometimes, yes, non-commercial organizations, non-profit organizations, they will set service objectives. Okay, I'm going to finalize in a few minutes and finish our last bit. So who are the stakeholders? Stakeholders, a group of people, different group of people that are somehow affected by the business activity. Now, if we let's outline 5 of them. In this case, customers, employees, owners, government, and community. So customers are obviously direct users and consumers of the business activity. If you're very well in producing certain product, then customers will benefit of it because it's high quality, or it's cheap, or it's affordable. So customers are directly affected by the business activity. Owners are obviously, because they're benefiting the profit. Employees are actually being hired, they're receiving their salaries, and if the business grows, it's good for the employees as well, because for certain employees, it's going to be some opportunity in a career growth, and more people would be hired. For the government, it's also good. Why government is so concerned and willing to help the business? Because businesses are the biggest taxpayers. They're paying the taxes to the government, so that the government can use this funding to implement some socially important projects. The community also benefits, or sometimes not benefit, but actually suffer from the business activity, especially if you are polluting the environment, if you're not actually following some certain rules. So the community also directly is impacted and affected by the business activities. Now, again, different stakeholder groups can actually have some conflicts of interests. So, for example, if you look at the shareholders' interests, and by the way, shareholder is not equal to the stakeholder. Shareholder is one of the group of stakeholders, but you can't use them interchangeably. Okay. Now, shareholders or owners, they're very much interested in profit maximization, isn't it? However, the customers will say, we don't want to pay you so much. We want to decrease the price, and there is a certain conflict of interests, isn't it? Or shareholders may want to reduce the costs and say, we don't want to hire so many people, or we don't want to increase the salaries. However, employees want to increase their salaries. So there is a certain conflict of interest all the time. Community obviously wants the business not to harm, not to pollute by any means. However, if you're producing, for example, oil or plastic, then it's inevitable that somehow, by some point, you're going to pollute the environment. That's inevitable. So why do we need to know all these stakeholders, and why do we need to know the conflicts of interest? Because it's about actually harmonizing the relationships and interests between all the stakeholders. I mean, you can't pollute the environment, saying that I don't want to spend a lot of money to buy this piece of technology, which is a little bit more environmentally friendly. I want to save it, but I'm going to pollute it. You can't say that, because community, in this case, you're going to have some troubles with that. You can't say I'm going to pay the lowest amount of salary because I want to save. Well, in this case, the employees are going to be very unhappy. They're going to strike and so on. You can't say to the government, I don't want to pay the taxes, because in this case, you're going to be you will have some troubles with the government, and so on. So there is always some sort of conflicts of interest, but the management's team, the management's objective, and the management's aim is to oversee all these interests and actually come to the consensus, so that you are sustainably ongoing, you are sustainably actually continuing your business activity. Good, that's the reference list, and see you next time.